All right. Hello once again, everyone. Welcome, welcome. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Panzano. I'm one of the directors of chapter development here at Delta Upsilon. We may have a couple more people trickling in here, but we will go ahead and get started because I respect your time. And so, with that, obviously, just introduced myself. I'm from the Florida chapter. Been on staff now for almost 2 years, which is crazy to think about. Loved every minute of it. I know I worked with some of your chapters personally as your chapter liaison, so thank you all for being here tonight. If you could do me one favor for attendance sake for the Men of Merit, if you could just go ahead and add whatever chapter you're representing next to your name, that would be awesome. As I see a couple of people here, Western Illinois, Lehigh. So yeah, if you could just add whatever chapter you're representing, that way we can take attendance and make sure your chapter gets all the credit for you being here. So. Without further ado, I have a very brief agenda tonight, not too much to cover. This is going to be more of the, we'll say, basics and oversight. And I have a couple of examples that I've used with some of my own chapters that I was hoping to share as well. And something that I'm sure if you've been in my webinars before, you know that I love to leave some time at the end for some questions and for you all to share some best practices as well, because you are experts, you are advisors, and we do respect and love to hear from you as well. So, going over the agenda here, really just again, here are some that we can do to help our chapters and make sure that there is a smooth transition between officers. I know a lot of your chapters are going through that right now, right? Being the November, December timeline tends to be when a lot of elections take place. I know some of you are also probably on the spring timeline where you do elections in May, but this can work year round. So here's just a quick list of topics we're going to cover, and we'll go ahead and jump into it right here. So we start with letters from outgoing officers, right? And I think this is pretty straightforward, but the whole intent here is we want to welcome this new officer into this position, right? And we want to make sure that they have a comfortable start. I always compare it to an airplane taking off, right? So the airplane, it can either be a smooth transition into the air, or sometimes it's a little bumpy and there's a lot of turbulence, right? And we want to make it as smooth as possible for the newly elected officers. So really, when we're writing these letters, when the undergrads are writing these letters, they should include the following. First off, hey, congratulations, you've won this position. Whether you ran against 5 other members or you were the only one that ran, congratulations, you are now a leader, right? And so I think with that, we have to acknowledge and celebrate that. And then we get into, all right, I know what is going to come down the line in this position, right? So, for example, I always use a VP academic excellence. I think that's a great universal example. A VP of academic excellence will have to know when they should be doing grade checks, when midterms are taking place, and that is going to vary from campus to campus. So, in terms of words of wisdom, right? If you're a VP academic excellence coming out of the role, you want to make sure that the new VP understands A, what is the timeline for when you should be doing your job? And B, right, what can I do that's proactive to make sure that the brothers are keeping up their GPA, actually graduating on time, right? Everything that they can do there. So, uh, also, just a little bit of encouragement and say, hey, I know that this is going to be a little bumpy at first, right? We talked about that turbulence, right, on the airplane taking off, and that's okay. And I think that when we acknowledge that it's all right to be nervous coming into the role, it does take off a bit of that pressure to say, you don't have to be perfect at this, right? I'm going to help you, and I want you to know that I also did not necessarily think I knew everything coming into the role, right? So it kind of adds a human element to it. And finally, who are the key supporters that are going to help you in your role to be successful, right? That could be the general chapter advisor, like I know some of you are. That could also be a specific advisor that is assigned to that executive officer. It depends on each chapter, depends on how many advisors you have. We also need to look at the resources on campus, right? Have we made a relationship with the fraternity and sorority life office, right? Do we know, for example, some of the associate deans on campus, and do they know who Delta Upsilon is, right? So getting that reputation out there is also something that may apply to the role. For example, a VP of external relations would probably need to know a lot of the people on campus beyond just the fraternity and sorority life office, right? So depending on where, the officers end up in whatever part of the year, that also is going to be a determinant of what they can accomplish, when they can accomplish it, and who they should be reaching out to, right? So something again to consider, campus culture varies. Some colleges are very small, some colleges have over 50,000 people, right? The SEC schools are going to be a little bit of a different experience than, let's say, Embry-Riddle or Iona College in New York, right? Very small schools. So I think it's also inherent for officers to pass on the wisdom of, we know this campus better than anyone and how I can operate in my role on this campus, right? Also, the semesters start and end. Some semesters begin during the winter time. Some colleges don't have that, right? And what can we do in that wintertime timeline that maybe other chapters can't do? Geography is also a big, important part of this. If we're looking at, let's say, a chapter that is, in the very far north, having responsibilities like shoveling snow, right, is probably not going to affect a chapter in, let's say, Gainesville, Florida, that is never going to experience snow, and if they do, we're all in trouble. But I think it's important to remember, right, that all different campuses, all different geographic spots are going to be elements that affect how each officer can conduct their role, right? Last thing on this, I just made a quick little sample here. And as a friendly reminder, we're going to send this presentation out to everybody. You'll have access to this online, so don't feel like you have to scribble a ton of notes. You'll have all of this information. But this is just a simple format, right? Hey, congratulations, serving as the next VP Finance at blah, blah, blah college. Here's the wisdom. Here's when you should be collecting the dues, right? You should have them sign promissory notes by this date. I was nervous to talk to my brothers about this before. It's okay to be a little bit nervous. And don't worry, we have our VP finance advisor, right? We have several alumni that are accountants and CPAs, and then they can help you through anything that you're going to encounter. Wish you the best. That's it. Nothing too complex, but I think it's a simple way for officers to retain that memory of the chapter's history as well, right? Because then we're, to quote part of our scripture here, it's we're not going to make rough the road for others, right? If you know your DU ritual book, but I think that is also in part of, we have to preserve the knowledge as it comes down the line, right? So quick overview of responsibilities here, right? Now, you're an advisor, you're approaching the officer, right, for the first time. Maybe you're the one hosting the executive board retreat or the transition meeting, right? I think it's important for them to understand that there is a formality to the role. And all of us here that have served in some type of executive board officer when we were undergraduates, I think it's fair to say you still have that experience with you. And so the formal responsibility, I put in there one of the quotes that we can have if you're using bylaws. Here's what you can actually say in a formal way in your bylaws to say, this is the formal responsibility of this officer, right? Now, if you are a newer chapter or you are advising an associate chapter, right? Your undergraduates may not have this written down yet. And so it would then be your job to make sure that within their bylaws, they have the formal responsibilities written somewhere so that they don't just, we'll say, make up or assume that this is the job of this particular officer, right? And then once we get out of the, we'll say, the holistic Delta Upsilon fraternity responsibility as a whole, we get into the chapter responsibility. Now, this is where we can get a little bit more, we'll say, local, creative with whatever the responsibilities may be, right? And if we're having, for example, someone that is going to be VP of, member education, we'll say, right? VP of member education might have a much different experience of resources that they can reach out to and everything, depending on the campus you're on. Your campus might also have a specific focus, right? For example, maybe almost every student is an engineer, right? And so because of that, we need to make sure that the chapter responsibilities match whatever the campus is providing as well for resources and availability. And again, to the point that I said earlier, let's think about the geography for a second, right? Shoveling snow is not really going to be a responsibility for someone that lives in the south, but someone in the north, that might be a huge deal that you need to consider. And some officer is going to have to be the one in charge of that whole operation, right? So I think that is important to remember as well. Just in case you are advising an associate chapter or even an expansion group, if your group does not yet have a set of bylaws, uh, feel free to email me directly. I do have some samples I've given out before, and I know that some of you on this call have actually used some of those samples and helped the undergraduates develop those. So don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel if you do need to get some of those written down for those of you that are advising newer groups. Within that, and it kind of relates to my picture here, a lot of executive officers are also chairmen of committees, right? So, for example, a VP of recruitment is probably head of the Rush Week committee, right? They'll have a team of their recruitment committee that they have to oversee. The VP of Academic Excellence is going to be on the Academic Review Committee, right? Where, as advisors, one of you should also be on that committee, but they're the ones overseeing it from the undergraduate side. You're the one overseeing it from the alumni side, right? So, whenever we have those positions, I think it's important to remember, this is great real world training, especially for those that go into the corporate world and may have direct reports, right? Now, the challenge, and I found this especially, is that if I can motivate my brothers to, let's say, clean up the facility, I could probably run a Fortune 500 company, right? And sometimes it's that level of motivation for success. And part of that as advisors is letting them in those trials and tribulations sort of we'll say stumble here and there, right? You don't have to do everything for them, and it's okay if they don't get it right away, or if they have a little bit of trouble, we'll say delegating or managing those responsibilities to their committee members. That's where you come in as the advisor and use your expertise, show them how they can do that and delegate properly while still also being respectful towards their brothers, right? Two other categories that came to mind. Everyone's favorite, the chapter excellence plan. If you're not familiar with this, please let me know, and I would be happy to explain. But basically, the chapter excellence plan is our way of helping officers to understand here are the tasks that you need to do throughout the year. If you're doing these tasks and you're doing them on the timeline that we're suggesting that you do them, you're doing as much as you can in your role, and you're doing it as successfully as you can within your role. So every single officer has some type of chapter excellence plan, we'll say entries that they can do throughout the year. Sometimes, depending on the position, for example, VP of recruitment, they will have to submit evidence for everything they did for recruitment in the spring, and then they also have to do it again in the fall. Hopefully, by the time they get around to the fall semester or the second semester, if you guys do elections in spring, they understand here's what I could have done better. The CEP helped me realize this, and it is a very useful tool if it's used correctly. The last part of this is the Men of Merit, we'll say scorecard and the implications that come out of the Men of Merit. So there are 10 different areas within the Men of Merit standards. If you're unfamiliar with that, I can help you afterwards if you do have any questions about Men of Merit. But there are essentially 10 categories, CEP being one of them, that we measure our chapters by nowadays, right? We are actually excited because we're going to have a live scorecard that you as advisors can go in and see how your chapter is doing in live time that we'll be releasing in the next few months. Until then, if you have any questions about the Men of Merit standards for your chapter and how you can help implement those or help, we'll say, motivate the officers to do a little bit more homework or hard work in those areas, you can email Christopher Gibson. He's our other director of chapter development. He oversees all of the Men of Merit standards, right? But just to give you two examples here, right? Membership size, obviously VP of recruitment is going to oversee that, right? Chapter GPA overall, VP academic excellence, making sure you have a zeroed out budget, or making sure that all of your dues and fees are paid, VP Finance, et cetera, et cetera. The only one that really doesn't have a big list on the chapter excellence plan, I should mention, is the president. But that is also because the president is more of a holistic, they're overseeing all of the positions and should be able to just jump in and help wherever. So they actually only have 2 submissions for the chapter excellence plan as a result of that. But as you know, right, they're overseeing the whole operation. So there's a bit more, we'll say, flexibility for their CEP requirements. I should also mention, just because, let's say someone is VP Finance, they don't necessarily have to be the one that submits anything for the chapter excellence plan. The VP of Administration can do it. You can have a CEP chair that also helps out with that. It really just depends on, again, what is your chapter's preference? What is their style? What do they prefer? Right. So in terms of the timelines here, this is really where we get into the wisdom of each position. I always say start with the master calendar. Every single officer has something on the master calendar, right? So what does that mean? Every single officer should know at some point when each of their responsibilities is going to need to be done. Now, the smooth way to do this is to host a transition retreat where the old officers and the new officers are sitting in the same room. The old officers are recalling everything they did, whether that's pulling up emails or pulling up CEP submissions, or whatever they did within their role. Maybe they kept a journal, I don't know. But we want that inherent knowledge to match whatever the master calendar is. Every single officer has something that they can put on the master calendar. Every single officer has something they can put on that master calendar, right? And also the CEP will, in some cases, tell you this should be submitted at the end of the semester. This should be submitted at the beginning of the semester or in the middle of the semester, right? Depending on the entry, CEP can be very useful for timelines as well. We also have the administration due dates and fees document. This is at deltau.org under the resources tab, right? And so this is going to give the timeline of the IHQ due dates for roster updates, for when dues and fees are going to be charged, right? And if you're looking at that document, it really helps you to understand, okay, if I'm an officer, A, does this document apply to me? Because it applies to about half of the officers, but not necessarily all of them. And B, okay, now that I know this, I'm putting it on the master calendar. And it all goes back to that master calendar. That is going to help immensely to organize the entire semester ahead of time. Now, the key deadlines we have to look at, we all know the difference between the soft, deadlines and the hard deadlines. Our undergraduates sometimes understand that and sometimes they don't, right? And I'm speaking as not only a volunteer for many years, but also as a former high school teacher. My former students either understood the deadline or they didn't, right? I'm giving this little example here of the CEP submissions that they're all due by December 31st. Now, that is true. My chapters know that our office is closing as of Saturday. And I told all of my chapters, for example, if you would like me to grade your CEP submissions and get it back to you in a timely manner, if you need any feedback, I need them done and submitted by December 20th, right? That's my hard deadline. The hard deadline for Delta Upsilon is December 31st. So as advisors, we should be asking ourselves, do we know any of the soft deadlines or hard deadlines? For example, fire inspections for housing facilities. That's a big one. We should know at least a general time frame of when our facilities should be preparing for those fire inspections. That is a huge task that a lot of facilities need to make sure that they complete, right? And so that's where, again, we really do need to take a look at what knowledge are we passing down, right, from officer to officer, and where can we as advisors poke in and just say, I don't see any of the fire inspections on the calendar. Remember, again, bringing it back to the calendar. Where is that? And would you mind looking that up? Now, obviously, the IHQ dues and fees, that one's pretty simple. The ones that for newer advisors you may not be aware of, reporting associate members, you have your undergraduates have 7 days after they report their associate members to pay the associate member fees. If they don't do that, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but they do get hit with a late fee that our system just, slaps on there if they don't pay it off in 7 days. So that's a prime example of, unless you read that administration dues and fees document, you may not know that, right? Or if you don't attend any of the educational programming, right, the undergraduates may not know that. So obviously a very big deal to keep an eye on. And then just any campus deadlines, right? So if your guys are having a philanthropy, right, and they're doing a volleyball tournament, right? Well, the volleyball court needs to be rented out. How far out do we need to book the volleyball court, right? Do we need to do any promotion for the philanthropies? Do we need to go to all the sorority houses, and do that? Where is that on the timeline? And again, is it on that master calendar? That should be the number one question we're asking at all times. Is it on the calendar? And if the answer is no, well, then they have a task to do, right? I always say the best way to approach that calendar, just start at the end and work backwards. We know when final exams are, right? The school produces that a year in advance. So we know that May 5th, that's when the finals are. Okay, so then from there, the guys are probably going to have a couple of days off before finals to, get their study in. So we can't do the philanthropy during that time because our guys are studying. We probably shouldn't do it around midterms either because, again, our guys are studying, right? So that can help balance out if you're working backwards, even if you don't have exact dates, right? Your guys can at least set up a window and say, hey, we're going to do our service event somewhere within this time frame in March, right? We would like to have a social mixer with Kappa Delta during this week in February, sometime in that week. At least it's on the calendar, and at least they can see, okay, we are going to plan for this sometime in this time frame, and we can work backwards so that we know what's coming, right, when the actual semester starts. It makes life a lot simpler. And I've helped a lot of executive boards that just as soon as they started from the finals week backwards, their lives got a lot easier. And they also realized when they needed to reserve some of these places on campus ahead of time, too. So I always say go the extra mile. It's never crowded. So I appreciate you all listening here. For those of you that joined a little late, we are going to have time for questions at the very end. So I do want to respect your time, and we're going to keep going here. So obviously, as the advisor, I would argue that you are the most relevant contact for them to reach out to for any type of assistance, right? I'm pretty sure we're all wise enough here to know that there's a difference between advising and doing the work for them, right? So we're going to teach a man to fish. We're not going to go fishing for them. And I think it's also important to remember, right? Your role is just simply to ask the questions. Well, have you considered this, right? I always love the phrase trash or treasure. I tell the guys, if you don't want to take my advice, hey, that's fine. I won't lose sleep over it. However, I've done this a couple of times, and I think I know when some of your timelines are coming down the line. So if you're ever having a little trouble with the buy-in, just say, hey, look, I'm just trying to make your life easier. That's all, right? Next important relevant person, obviously maintaining a great relationship with the fraternity and sorority advisors and coordinators on campus is always a fantastic option, right? They may be able to help reserve, that room for initiation that you really want, or that volleyball court if you really want it for your philanthropy. If we maintain great relationships with them, right? I would encourage the undergraduates to invite them to have dinner at your facility if you have that, or to attend your pinning ceremony or your initiation ceremony, whatever you are putting on as a chapter. I would say make sure that we're at least inviting the advisors or the coordinators of fraternity sorority life out there. Worst they say is no. Best case scenario, you develop a great relationship. They know Delta Upsilon. They can help you to help the guys, especially if they may miss a deadline or two on that calendar, right? So very important resource there. I'll throw myself out there as a, HQ liaison. I tend to be a wealth of knowledge. I mean, remember, this is what we do all day long, right? I tell a lot of my undergraduates, hey, part of your dues, pay my salary. I want to earn that salary. So please reach out to me as a resource, right? Whether it's hosting, the executive officer transition with you as an advisor there, we are more than happy to help with that transition. We do need to know a little bit in advance, if you could just give us a heads up, and we are more than happy to do a virtual, executive officer transition. If we're close enough on staff and we're able to come to your chapter, we can do that as well. So please feel free to use this as a resource. And if you as advisors ever have any questions, again, this is our job all day, every day to work for Delta Upsilon. Please reach out. We are here to help. And then obviously the former officer or officers of the position. I don't think it's any secret that as advisors, sometimes you will encounter an undergraduate that may not have taken the role as seriously as we had hoped, or maybe just didn't want to accomplish any or all of their tasks that they did. And so if that is the case, maybe we're not going to look to them to be the prime contact as the former officer, but what about the one before that, right? And I think as undergraduates understand as they get older, as they graduate, as they become alumni, they want to get back involved, right? Everyone here is back involved. And at some point, someone said, or you said to yourself, I'd like to go back and help the undergraduates, right? So I think a lot of our young alumni too are kind of they're hunkering to get back in there and really help out where they can, because they're in that awkward transition phase of, well, now I'm a person and I have a career, right? And I can't do what I did as an undergraduate anymore. But if we give them that opportunity, it really can help them, and it helps the officer in the position as well. So obviously, in terms of documents, right, what are the most important ones that all of our officers need to be aware of? I would argue the Constitution and bylaws of the fraternity itself would be important to just take a glance at, especially the ones that are pertaining to the position, right? Those are pretty straightforward. And we also want to make sure that the chapter bylaws are also understood. Now, again, depending on if you have a facility or not, that's going to determine if you have house rules or if you have quiet hours or anything like that. That's another, we'll say, separate part of that. Some people have their own constitution for the house rules. It's like a separate document from everything else. But every chapter, every associate chapter is going to have bylaws, right? Those bylaws will, again, pertain to what is the campus culture, right? What is the geography of the area? When does the semester start and end? And how well do you know the locality of the community around you, right? Those bylaws tend to be shaped by those things. Now, in terms of making sure contact information for incoming and outgoing officers, we have to adapt with the times. And I say that as someone that I still like to call people on the phone. From our newer audience of undergraduates, I think most of you know that's becoming a thing they don't want to do, right? So I think we also have to get clever with using some of the newer apps. For example, GroupMe is very popular with the undergraduates. I work with chapters that the advisors have the old officers and the new officers in one group chat so that there's always a constant connection. And then you as advisor can run the chat and have that oversight. So in case, we'll say there's a big squabble about, the latest Rush t-shirt or, any of those arguments that would take 5 hours in chapter, right? You can kind of step in as the advisor and say, okay, we're going to shut this down for just a hot second. We're going to take a look at this, right? How can we help to solve this? So just something that I would throw out there as a suggestion. If an officer has a budget as well, depending on, again, if you have a house facility, you may have VP Academic Excellence that has a $500 budget for snacks during exam time, or the VP of Recruitment obviously wants to buy Rush shirts. The VP External Relations wants to get flowers and a card for every sorority's founder day, right? So it just depends on your chapter. You know your chapter's best. Does that officer have a budget Should that officer have a budget? That's another question to ask, right? And will that get approved by the chapter and making sure that happens the way it can? So just something to throw out there. Officer's budget, definitely a good thing to look at there. Now, in terms of resources, right? Most of our resources that I can offer you as IHQ liaison, they're going to be on the website. And right there under the resources tab, every single official officer position that we have has resources under them. Some of the resources are repeated to reflect that this officer should know about this information. An example of that would be those administration due dates and fees that I mentioned earlier. We also have some, we'll say some fun ones. So for example, under VP member education, we have brotherhood development ideas, right? And just over 100 ideas of what brothers can do to have a substance-free retreat, or a lot of them take those brotherhood ideas, those activities, and they turn them into fundraisers. I've helped many chapters to turn those around and actually raise money for either GSI or just to have a bigger budget, right? If they want to have that Kappa Delta social and maybe they need to rent out a venue, well, here's the way that we can raise funds for that is by doing these activities. So it's definitely a wealth of information. I would encourage everyone to take a look at it. One last thing I forgot to mention under resources, there's a whole advisor resources page as well. That's where these webinars will show up. So in case this is your first webinar, that's where they're going to come in. Right. The Men of Merit scorecards, I mentioned this earlier. We're very excited that we're going to have the scorecards that you as advisors can access live on the Delta Upsilon portal coming in the next few months. We've been developing this, and I say we, I should take no credit for this. Christopher Gibson, CJ Gibson, has been the main man behind that, so I'm going to give him credit for that. But at the end of the day, you as an advisor will be able to go to the DU portal and click on any one of the 10 Men of Merit standards that we have and see where your chapter that you're advising is at in real time and how you can help them. We're also color coding it so that, if you see something in red, all right, well, there you go. That's your first task, right? Is to help the chapter with that. So very excited for that. For now, if you do want your scorecard, you can just email CJ. I would do so probably by tomorrow, though, because again, our office is going to be closed until right after the new year. Otherwise, we can definitely get it to you in the new year. The Membership Outcomes Assessment Report. This is the survey that we have the undergraduates take once a year, and essentially it helps us to understand what is the campus culture like, what is the chapter like, what are the expectations of all of the members, right? What are they looking for out of their fraternity experience? So this is actually a great way for you to see, okay, this is what my chapter values, right? And if my chapter values this, I want to make sure that I am providing the right guidance to help them achieve their goals. If we have, for example, a chapter that shows that maybe some of the things that they enjoy aren't really focused on, we'll say Delta Upsilon, they're focused just more on the, we want to hang out and party aspects. Well, then as an advisor, you can also come in, see that data and say, all right, maybe we need to refocus this, try to, turn it back to what Delta Upsilon is as a foundation, right? Any of our ed programs materials are fantastic. So we have our President's Academy coming up. Also, we have the Delta Upsilon Emerging Leaders Experience happening at Camp Tecumseh in Indiana at the same time as President's Academy. So many of you would know these programs well. Our Regional Leadership Academy is now open for registration. That will be in February. So depending on where your chapter that you're advising is, you can go ahead and take a look at the map and just choose whichever academy you feel like would be the best for you and help the undergraduates there. One thing I always encourage advisors to keep in mind is that we do need to consider the logistics of transportation to these educational programs. So it's something to keep in mind for budgeting purposes. I would advise your chapters to just save a little bit of money on the side and put it towards the educational programming, especially for transportation, right? Whether that means the guys are taking a road trip and they have to buy food and gas, Or if they decide if they want to fly, if that's an easier option, what would that cost? How many people are we sending, et cetera, et cetera. Master calendar. I think I've said it about 9 times now, so I'm going to just repeat it a 10th. Master calendar, very important. Instructions about how to navigate the DU portal. On deltau.org's website, we do have a full resource page now just for the Delta Upsilon portal. So if you're a new advisor or you're still unfamiliar with how to navigate the Delta Upsilon portal, as long as you are assigned officially as the chapter advisor for your chapter, you will be able to navigate the portal and see what the undergraduates see. So that means you will be able to see their chapter statement, how many bills they have, what invoices did they need to pay, what is their roster like, have they reported their associate members yet, right? If they just had initiation, these are important factors. Also, can help you to understand the virtual programs. So we have all of our associate members should be completing the Tightrope program. A lot of you knew it as Community EDU back in the day. Now it's just called Tightrope. It's the same idea. It's the educational programming on drug and alcohol abuse, anti-hazing, making sure that undergraduates understand this is the expectation that we have as DU men, right? So all of those instructions are on the website as well. And again, you know your chapter better than anyone. The campus forms that you need to file maybe every semester. Sometimes they're once a year, sometimes they're once a semester. I use the fire inspection example because I feel like it's different on many different campuses, but it is a universally known fact. If you have a facility, you need that. But either way, right, if you're going to host initiation, if your guys are going to host it on campus, we need to make sure a room is reserved. Do they know how to do that? Do you know how to do that? Right? I think these are important questions to ask. Also, what kind of forms are IFC requiring nowadays? Some of you, the formal recruitment period, every potential new member has to register before they sign up. Well, we as advisors need to know that if that's the thing on your campus so that our chapters don't get in trouble for dirty rush or whatever the terms would be because they recruited someone that didn't sign up when they were supposed to, right? So those are just some of the examples of resources we can offer to the officers to make their life a little bit easier. Hopefully, you as advisors can utilize them as well, right? And so, I really appreciate you guys listening to me and my corny jokes. I'll just open up the floor here if we have any questions and/or if you have some best practices you would like to share. I always love to hear those. I steal your ideas as well. So, any questions or anything you'd like to add, feel free to unmute and share. Give a nice, good faith. Oh, someone unmuted. Right. Ken, I think from Syracuse. Ken, did you want to share anything with us?
Yeah, so I'm actually just curious, and maybe it's a question for you, but also for the other advisors on the call. What's the cadence of the communication that the advisors have with the executive board? So for Syracuse, I'm the chairman of our advisory board. I have an advisor that's aligned with every executive board officer. So we've got 7, 8 advisors. We have a monthly call. During that monthly call, we have the president and the executive vice president of the chapter on the call with us. And there's a point that I ask each one of the advisors about the communication they've had with the executive board position that they're advising. And that's sort of how, we check in. And my expectation is that the advisors are each talking to their mentor throughout the course of the month. I'm just curious with my other advisors, or if you have a suggestion, is that sort of best practice, or do people have other ways of handling that?
I do have some thoughts on that, but I'd love to hear from some of our advisors first, because again, you guys are the experts for your chapters. So, anyone like to respond to that?
Happy to share that at University of Tampa, we meet as an all exec, all advisor group monthly, and that's been really efficient. And beyond that, all of us who are on the advisors meet for a call, typically about every other week for 30 minutes with our assigned exec members. So there's kind of a cadence of mixing those two together works for us. We're a new chapter, so definitely have been playing a little bit closer lately, texting quite a bit on the off weeks, but that's what's worked for us lately.
Great, thanks. So you have all of the advisors and the entire exec board on a monthly call.
Correct.
Yeah,
And
thanks.
in those sessions, you know, it's sometimes we do have specific topics, but at the very least, it's a round table of asking every exec member to give everyone kind of a quick update on how things are going, so that we hear from everybody.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And I actually want to commend Nick for a second. He helped the Tampa Associate Chapter to get approval to be chartered. So they're going to be chartered on March 2nd of next year. And it's thanks to Nick and his team. So thank you, Nick. Appreciate you very much, sir. My thoughts on it, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's yeah. Where's the click emoji thing I can do here? I can't find it. But just echoing Nick's sentiments, love that model. I think if we're doing an effective meeting once a month, right? I value quality over quantity. So some chapter advisors, they talk with their guys once a week. Sure, there's nothing wrong with that. I also think that with jobs, with kids, with all of this other responsibility, I mean, as an advisor, as long as you're using your time effectively, as long as the conversations are still pertinent and relevant to the undergraduates, right? I only say that because the last piece of advice I would say, I've done this too. We get a little caught up in we'll say the good old days of retelling our tales, and sometimes that gets the message off track from what the undergraduates need. So again, I say it as someone that fully guilty. I've caught myself telling, tales of the Florida chapter to my Florida brothers that are undergraduates to watch them say, what? So, yeah, love the sentiment though. Any other thoughts here from the crowd? Any other best practices we want to share? Give it a nice good faith 10 seconds here. I see Dave posted in the chat there. So Dave said our advisory group does periodic early morning breakfast to compare what we hear from the undergraduates. Love that too, right? Make it fun, make it an advisor dinner every, once a month if you can, if you're geographically able to, right? Because part of this experience is this should be enjoyable for you as well. So I love that, Dave. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. Any other best practices, thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? Nope. Not hearing any, not seeing any. All right. Fair enough. Well, gentlemen, I respect your time. Thank you very much for being here. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing. And so if you could, just before you leave, if your name is written, but you do not have the chapter that you're representing next to your name, before you leave, could you just throw that in there? And then that way we'll make sure that your chapter gets credit.